I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Today we are doing another user-requested episode. Look at this. All of a sudden, this big influx. I hope we get more.
I hope we get more, too. It's so useful. We're always spinning our wheels trying to figure out what we want to talk about next.
Yeah.
So keep them coming.
And it's very validating to actually talk about something we know people are demanding and interested in. So we definitely appreciate it.
Some of the ideas in our backlog we circle back on and we're like, I don't think anyone would actually want to hear us talk about this. So at least we know we have one in the bucket today.
Yes. And today we are talking about the cohabitation effect. I did not even know what this was when this person reached out to us. Have you heard of this before?
I have, but only because I took an economics of marriage in the family course in college. So we did kind of talk about this, but I have not revisited in a long time.
Okay. Do you want to tell us what you remember from that course, high level, about what this is?
Yeah. So when you decide to live with your partner actually has a very tangible effect on the outcome of your relationship. And there's a lot of confounding factors into why this is, a lot of economic driven factors. So this is why it's important in the field of behavioral economics specifically. But essentially the TLDR of this is if you move in with your partner previous to getting engaged or marriage, you are more likely to end up in divorce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more likely to end up in divorce and have lower marital quality. Marital satisfaction is the effect. I literally had never heard of this. It was very surprising to me when I initially Googled this because I would have thought that cohabitating before marriage would actually result in a higher likelihood of success of your marriage since you're testing things out and able to feel out what it's actually like to live together. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if as soon as you move in together, there's a high likelihood that you'll break up. But then if you make it through that period where you're living together and then you get married, I would think that you'd actually have a better chance of success.
Yeah, logically, I would think the same. I actually know in my personal life a lot of people who would never get married or engaged without living with a partner first because that feels way more risky to hitch yourself legally to somebody that you've never lived with. So it is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the survey data from the Pew Research Center, and half of U.S. adults say that couples who live together before marriage have a better chance of having a successful marriage than those who don't live together. 13% say couples who live together before marriage have a worse chance, and then 38% say it doesn't make a difference. And that's more along the lines of what I would have assumed the research would show. So I would say I went into researching the cohabitation effect with some skepticism. Obviously, it has a name. So there are studies supporting that it exists. But as we know, and we've done a lot of research for the pod, and we always get this in our comment section as well when I post TikTok clips, folks are always like, causation does not equal correlation.
Yeah.
Of course we know that.
That is always my favorite comment because it's like, do you think these actual PhD researchers writing these papers are not familiar with that concept? Oh, but you, Mr. TikTok commenter. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, didn't even think of that when they wrote this.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, even though, again, you can't prove causation, I do think it's very interesting to see what the studies say because there's a lot of studies both for it and some that complicate this effect. So we'll get into that a bit later. But then, Jennifer, you also looked at more of the psychology behind why people move in together and how it potentially affects you after you get married.
Yes. It varies a lot why people move in together, and it actually really matters your intentions and why, and the timing of everything. It is very significant. And it does affect your mindset and therefore your happiness and even your mental health and therefore your marriage.
I think it'll be an interesting conversation because we'll start with the cohabitation effect, what the numbers say, because a lot of these studies looking at it are looking at survey data, they're looking at populations as a whole, and then I'm eager to hear what you found in terms of if it's true or not, why that may or may not be the case. And then the last thing that I was just personally very curious about, I had a friend over for dinner last night and she just recently got married. I was talking to her because Avery right now is out of town. He's out of town for 2 weeks for work. And I was complaining to her because it was like, I feel so much less independent now that I've been in this long-term relationship. I'm not even used to taking out the trash anymore. We've heavily specialized in the tasks that we do at home. And I'm not even talking about typical gender roles in terms of, oh, the man works and the woman does household chores. Obviously, we're not in that situation. I don't have a kid. I'm not a stay-at-home mom by any means. But I do think like within household chores and tasks, we have heavily, heavily specialized. There are things that I just never ever do. I never grocery shop anymore.
Really?
Never. Never lift a
Wow.
bag. Yeah. And even when it comes to like taking care of our dog, Rooney, Avery always brushes Rooney's teeth and I do all of the grooming. So I like cut his hair and I trim his nails. Anyway, so I was just talking to her because I was like, I feel like I'm missing an appendage when Avery's gone for a long time. I mean, of course I miss him, but not even just because of the emotional connection, but just because literally things in our house don't get done. Slash, it's so weird for me to do them because I just never do them anymore.
Oh, that's kind of sweet.
She was like, that's so weird. That doesn't happen to me at all. Because I was asking her, because she just got married. I was like, is that what it's like for you? And she was like, no. We more of like share. And by that, I mean like she takes out the trash one week, he takes out the trash another week, that kind of setup.
Interesting.
And so I was curious, what is actually more common amongst other people? So
Did you find research on that?
I did. I tacked that on. I tacked that onto this. I think it's kind of related to cohabitation because I looked specifically on if you cohabitate before you get married, if there's any difference in the way that you specialize in tasks as a couple.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Huh. Did you and Avery live together before you got married?
We did, yes. We moved to Kenya together. That was the first time we lived together.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys did it in the deep end, kind of living together.
Yeah.
Foreign living together.
Right. I think that was a huge test for us. Lived together for a year and a half. We almost did break up during that period. So I do think it's a very good testing ground. Then we got engaged and then we got married.
And you're in a happy marriage. So defying the statistics here.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see about the statistics. Not we'll see about my relationship.
I was like,
No. You were like, ha ha ha.
yeah, I was like, ha, hilarious. We don't need two people in Heartbreaker.
No. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty of cohabitation. When you look at this term and like the research as a whole, there's two broad types of cohabitation. There's cohabitation as a prelude to marriage, and then there's cohabitation as an alternative to marriage. Both are common in the Western world and becoming more and more common. In the United States, 3/4 of recent marriages, 2015 to 2019, were preceded by cohabitation.
So many.
So many. I was pretty surprised by that, honestly. And the number was 11% in the 1960s and 70s and has grown a lot. Yeah, consistently. In Europe, cohabitation without marriage is more common than the US, so cohabitation as an alternative to marriage. And I feel like I knew about this vaguely because like I have had friends who are European whose parents had them before they were married or who had never gotten married. And when I was growing up and I was younger, I was always like, wow, that's so strange. Like, I feel like I don't really hear about that with American children. And culturally for them, it was like very, very normal. And so the numbers support this. The Scandinavian countries in particular were the first to lead this trend. And in Sweden, if you look at the percentage of couples between the ages of 15 to 44, just under 40% of relationships are a marriage with children. And 35% of relationships are cohabitation with children.
Wow, so it's almost equally as
common. I was
common.
shocked, yeah. I think it's quite hard to compare cohabitation as an alternative to marriage because I think a lot of the numbers around this, like my question is always, well, are they just cohabitating for now and then eventually they'll get married? Like it's a pretty standard step as we just saw, like majority of people in the US and in Europe cohabitate before marriage. So that's why I thought it was so shocking that if you look at it even in terms of who has a child, because you would think get married and then you have a child.
I couldn't imagine doing that because like a child doesn't go away. It is definitionally a more long-term serious commitment to have a child with somebody than it is to get married to somebody. So I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't really understand the logic. If you're making the commitment to procreate, why can't you make the commitment to get married? I don't understand. No judgment. It's interesting to me because I don't logically understand it.
I know. I feel like culturally it is just different in some of these European countries. Marriage is more just like the legal documentation and the formal institution. It has nothing to do with the commitment. Whereas I feel like culturally here in America, getting married is like the biggest sign of commitment prior to having a child that you could like give to someone. it's just harder to break up. So I think that's naturally like divorce is such a pain in the ass that I think it keeps people together.
Yeah. I mean, in defense of American culture, though, this isn't an American thing. This is a human institutionalized thing for since like the beginning of, I don't know, civilization, right? Like marriage has always been around. So it's not like we're doing some unique thing here. And it's honestly like a protection for women. I think it's like a little bit of a feminist issue, honestly. Like you need the commitment and the protection because you're vulnerable as fuck when you're a mother and have a child.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the child statistic really shocked me. Said another way, more than half of the children born in 11 European countries have unmarried parents.
Wow, that is crazy. It's going to mess up all of these sociology, psychology studies because there's always that confounding risk factor for depression, future divorce rate, etc. if your parents are married versus unmarried. So now the baseline is going to have to be like if your parents both live in your home or, some other metric. Because you actually do have a different life trajectory if your parents are married or not, if you were raised by a single parent or a two-parent household.
It's an interesting time we're living in. To me, I'm like, oh, we're becoming like way more liberal with the definition of families and like what constitutes a committed partnership. I think historically, like even if I think about when I was a kid and like my elementary school class, like I grew up in Michigan. It's so I guess somewhat conservative of a state. And people knew who came from, maybe it was single parent household or just divorced or just like not that traditional American unit as old fashioned as that is, where it's like mom, dad, kid, house,
Yeah.
It's very refreshing, honestly. All right. So is the cohabitation effect real? The answer to this is complicated and actually very interesting because for most, I think if you were to just Google this, the results that you would get would be pretty scary. Like they would pretty much confirm that you should not move in together before you got married if you wanted the best likelihood of marital happiness, success, all of those things. However, when you dig in a little deeper, that's not really the case. So this cohabitation effect was first discovered, quote unquote, through this 2004 study from the University of Denver. And they looked at 136 couples, so not a huge sample size, and it was survey data. So they basically called a bunch of couples and coded their responses, asking them questions around their marital satisfaction after engagement, but before marriage, and then 10 months into marriage. And at both of these time points, the before engagement cohabitors, which was 59 couples, had more negative interactions, lower interpersonal commitment, lower relationship quality, and lower relationship confidence than those who did not live together until after the engagement, which was only 28 couples, or after being married, which was 49 couples. And they did control for some of the more obvious selection factors like age, income, education, whether you're religious or not, and for the duration of cohabitation. So that was the initial study that I think made a lot of waves and coined this term, the cohabitation effect, and I think got a lot of press and freaked a lot of people out. I mean, there's honestly been so many studies on this. I'm like, where's all the funding coming from? Maybe because it freaked people out. There were a lot more studies. Another 2004 study looked at the relationship between premarital cohabitation and then actually divorce specifically, rather than just marital satisfaction. And so this was a sample of 1,425 spouses in 2 U.S. marriage cohorts. So those married between 1964 and 1980, which they're terming as when cohabitation was less common. And then those married between 1981 and 1997, when it was more common. This study found that spouses in both cohorts who cohabited prior to marriage reported poorer marital quality and higher divorce rates. So those two studies basically, that's the headline right there for the cohabitation effect, that you're going to get divorced and you're going to be unhappy if you've lived together before marriage.
Damn.
There was a follow-up study in 2009 expanding on that first study I covered from the University of Denver, where they surveyed more people. So they looked at 1,000 people, did a very similar survey, and the results were confirmed in that follow-up. However, I think this paper did a lot more work in terms of analyzing why this may be the case or may not be the case, rather than like just looking at the numbers and presenting those, which I think is only telling one side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of their theories as to why they're seeing this correlation could be that one, qualitative studies suggest that some couples slide into cohabitation without discussing what it means for the future of the relationship. There is this theory called the inertia theory, where if you're already cohabitating, you are more likely to get married, partly because it's just easier to stay together and you don't have to deal with moving out and finding a new place to live and all of that. And so the experience of cohabiting in and of itself might lead some couples to marry, even if they would not have chosen to get married if they had not already been living together. The other theory this paper talked about is the self-selection explanation. So even though they controlled for some of these selection variables, right, like age, religiousness, there could be other personal characteristics that influence whether you choose to get married or not. When cohabitation was less common, it was a smaller group of people who were cohabitating before marriage, and then the people self-selecting into that group maybe shared some traits in common that would make them more likely to get a divorce regardless of whether they live together or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so enough time has passed actually where we can judge the validity of that. Like even in the last 10 to 20 years, there's been more studies that have shown that actually if you look at these cohorts of marriages over time, there is a difference. So there was a 2012 study where researchers looked at marriages before 1996 and marriages after 1996. And in the marriages after 1996, they did not find any cohabitation effect at all.
Zero.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I think that the cohabitation effect, depending on what data source you're looking at and what variables you're controlling, you can see a statistically significant result. In terms of how real are the implications for like us and what we should be doing with this data, I think there's too many confounding variables for it to actually mean something in a way that like you should actually take action on it. And especially as time goes on and more couples are cohabitating before marriage, the effects are becoming less and less, if not nothing, if not honestly the inverse. There have also been studies now showing that if you cohabitate before marriage, you're more likely to be satisfied in your marriage, which is more along the lines of maybe my initial assumption. And the reason for that is, like we said earlier, is because you are using that cohabitation period to learn more about match quality and like making an informed decision for your future.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at this point, this term is still like floating around, but it's largely been debunked in a real world, like practical, like should you actually change your behavior due to this effect or this study?
Yeah, I think what was interesting, especially about looking into the psychology of what happens when you cohabitate, why people do it, and like how it affects you. It's kind of like a nature versus nurture conversation. Like, are you already predisposed to get divorced later in life, and then that's what's causing you to cohabitate earlier? Or is the cohabitation itself the thing that is driving the divorce? And it is extremely difficult to parse out the causation versus correlation question. And depending on how the researchers conduct the studies, you get a completely different answer.
Yeah.
And then there's also this secondary confounding factor of what is societally acceptable, and therefore who is self-selecting into cohabitation because of societal changes over the decades. So like this idea of cohabitation itself is actually changing something is really difficult, if not impossible, to prove, and just has not been proven at all in the research.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't know, maybe it's like this for a lot of things, but if you just do an initial Google and you just Google the cohabitation effect, you will only find articles in support of this because you're not like searching the right terms. You're not searching like, well, what's the con? Or because the term has a definition to it, what you're going to get on your like first 3 pages of Google results, you know, which I think is like the average person is obviously, me included, typically only going to look that far. You're only going to find stuff that supports it. You're not going to realize the challenges that you just pointed out, right? Which is why I think there's such a big misconception around this.
Yeah, and it was funny when you said there are so many scholarly articles on this. Why is that? And part of the reason is actually because there's a vested interest in keeping divorce rates low by the government. And these are actually like relatively cheap studies to conduct. So when I was in college, my professor who did this economics of family and the marriage course, one of her major pieces of research was actually on cohabitation after the 2008 recession, because people were financially driven to cohabitate. And the concern was that there was going to be this huge spike in divorce rates. that turned out to be sort of true. And it gets into this conversation about intentions when you cohabitate. This gets into the psychology of like why we're doing it. So typically there's 4 reasons why people cohabitate. It's either you're sliding into it, it's out of convenience,
Mhm.
you're sleeping at each other's houses all the time. And so it's just like more convenient to start living together.
Especially if you live in New York City. You're paying a lot in rent.
Well, there you go. This is the recession question. It's a financial decision as well. As rent prices skyrocket, people cohabitate earlier, potentially leading to divorce rates increasing. The third is to test the relationship. And the fourth is because you want to spend more time with your partner. So, like we said, most people slide into the relationship or make a financial decision. Less likely that you're cohabitating because you want to spend more time with your partner, which is kind of sad. So it's 64% of people have these other reasons and 36% just want to spend more time. There is a 13% difference in who gets divorced based on if you're doing it for the relationship reasons versus these other reasons. Yeah.
Wait,
So
let me guess. Let me guess.
Okay.
You're saying 13% more likely to get divorced for one of these 4 reasons.
Okay, so there is one reason that is 6% more likely to get divorced than the other reasons. However, those 3 combined altogether have a 13% more likelihood of getting divorced than if you're just doing it to spend more time together, if it's a relational reason versus an external factor reason.
Got it.
Definitely you should guess the one that is the worst.
Okay, so my options are finance, convenience. What was the third?
Testing the relationship.
What does that even mean? Not that one. See, I'm inclined to say finance because you would think the money thing, but honestly, I'm like, if you're worried about finances, you probably wouldn't get divorced. So maybe those effects would cancel each other out. At the outset, you would think like, oh, well, saving money isn't a good enough reason to move in together. But people who aren't happy in their marriage but also want to save money probably aren't also getting divorced, you know?
Okay, so not finances.
I don't think finances. So my other options are convenience or just testing out the relationship. Okay, convenience then.
No.
Which is it?
Testing out the relationship.
What? Really?
Yeah. So I think it's time we talk about inertia. You touched on this earlier, but one of the reasons cohabitation is considered to result in divorce is because of the inertia effect. So basically, this just means that when you are not clearly committed yet, you're not married, you're not engaged, but you're living together, you have so much inertia in the relationship that it gets hard to leave. And you might just end up getting married to somebody that you shouldn't be married to because you're living together and it's just easier than breaking up. This is called being prematurely entangled. So you might be entangled with somebody that you really shouldn't be. And when you're testing the relationship, you already have doubts. You're not quite sure that this is the person for you, but you're going to like try it anyway. And then you might get prematurely entangled and just stay in this bad relationship and ultimately end up in a divorce.
I see. Okay, that is not how I would think about testing the relationship. I guess people are answering this when they're like, oh, I'm not sure, to your point, and therefore it's like, it'll either work or it won't. And they have more confidence in themselves than they should, that if it doesn't work, they'll be able to leave.
Yeah.
For me, I saw like me and Avery moving to Kenya as a huge testing the relationship thing. I don't think I like went in having doubts, but just more like, you have to test it. You have to like challenge your relationship and go through hard shit because marriage is hard and having kids is hard and like having sickness and illness and all of that is hard. And so you're like way better off going through those challenges now. So I guess maybe I'm learning that I'm just like more strong-willed than maybe the average person. Because
yeah,
if it had not worked out, we would definitely would have broken up. We would not have just gotten married out of convenience at that point.
I think we talked about this in our breakup episode, but aren't you somebody that is like not afraid to break up? You're okay cutting your losses if you need to.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's a really excellent quality. Not everyone has that. Most people get entangled and then it's really hard to leave.
And it's so much harder later, though. Getting divorced is so much harder than moving out of someone's house.
Totally. But I guess, you just hope that it's going to work out or like you can work out the things later.
I've always been very interested to see amongst my friends in the next 10 years who will get divorced, given the divorce rate is 50%. I have predictions.
Yeah.
Not that I would tell anybody, but of course I have my thoughts. Yeah.
God, I don't know if I know anybody that I think is going to get divorced.
Oh, it's
Maybe
because you're
like
such
one
a
couple.
romantic. I'm a
No.
realist. I look at them and I'm like, that's not gonna work.
No, you know what it is? Nearly all of my friends that are married, they've been together for a very long time, like since college or like right after college. So it's like, oh, they've just always been together. It was just the next natural step. I don't know anybody that kind of like rushed into a marriage or anything. I'm like, maybe not that one. It would have been me. And I'm not the person getting divorced now, thank God. But
Yeah, your friends would have all picked you.
oh, 100%. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, yes, don't by the numbers test your relationship by cohabitating. Bad idea. Unless you're pretty sure already. Unless you're Lucy and can just cut your losses when you need to. So the opposite side of this coin is, of course, the relational piece of it. So if you're moving in together because you want to spend more time together, it means that you're underlying all of this, have a very strong quality relationship. So obviously, probably not going to get divorced. However, what makes you more likely to be one of those people that is doing it for the right reasons is not choosing to move in with your partner for finances, etc. And this is the selection part of it. So people that self-select into cohabitating before marriage tend to come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They tend to be less educated, tend to come from traumatic or unstable family situations in childhood, and therefore they're more likely to get divorced just outside of the realm of cohabitation. So it's more of like a
Mm.
confluence of factors. And I thought that was really interesting. And then when we were talking about the Europe issue, where many kids are getting born out of wedlock, it really makes me think that these numbers and this perception is going to change as time goes on, because this does feel like a very what's normal in society driven type of conclusion.
Yeah, honestly, that feels like pretty outdated even now. I think now that like 75% of couples are cohabitating before marriage, and like the study that I referenced showed, right? Like, I think as time goes on, you're less likely to see those pre selection factors play a role at all. I see it
Mm-hmm.
as like most people I know now are living together before they get married, just as like the natural step one would take. Has nothing to do with like if your parents were divorced or not, if you're more skeptical of love or not, or anything like that. You know, it's just part of the normal steps.
Yeah, definitely. But it's interesting though, because I wonder if people who like came from, well, I don't even have to wonder. This is part of the research. If you come from a divorced family or you were like raised by a single mother, unfortunately, you are more likely to encounter that later on in life too. It's kind of a generational problem. So I guess this gets back into the intention, the inertia aspect of it. Did your parents cohabitate for one of these quote unquote bad reasons? Or was it a quality relational reason that they were cohabitating, had a child, maybe got married later on, maybe never separated? And so you're not inheriting like that generational trauma that would make you more likely for divorce later on. So yeah, interesting stuff to contemplate as
Yeah.
the decades go on.
Yeah. So I guess you're saying like it would be interesting to see in another 20 to 30 years if there's some sort of boomerang effect. We're seeing like cohabitation either before marriage or as an alternative increase to these very high rates. And
Mhm.
it'll be interesting if the kids of those parents who are cohabitating end up being like, that actually wasn't great for me. I'm gonna like choose marriage for myself instead because
Yeah.
of some, yeah, we don't really know the consequences. I feel like we know the consequences of marriage because it's been around for so long. But this like cohabitating, having kids, never ever getting married is very new.
Very, very new. So, in the selection realm as well, there are something called serial cohabitators. So, if you've cohabitated with more than one partner, you're considered a serial cohabitator, which I thought was a very low definition. I feel like many people have lived with more than one person. But yes, if you are a serial cohabitator, you are much more likely to get divorced.
Why? Is that just like commitment issues?
You know
Or
what?
like
They
you don't
didn't
have a
say.
good picker because you already moved in with one person, so you thought that was going to be your person and then you were wrong?
You know, they didn't really get into details about this, but I found it so interesting that that was the case. I was going to ask you what you thought.
It would be interesting to see if this is a trend just for dating in general. Like if you've dated 10 plus partners, are you more likely to have a divorce than if you've dated under 5? I'm just making those numbers up. But like
Mm.
the idea of serial cohabitating kind of gets to that, which I could argue either way. I could argue that the more you experience, the better chance you have because you have all this data of like picking the right
Mhm.
person at the end of the day. And the less you experience, like your example when you were talking about your friends of people who've been together forever, the high school sweethearts do not have a good chance of actually staying married.
Really?
So, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Hmm. I don't know if this is like that. Yeah. So it's kind of shocking. Like the difference between living with one person or two, it seems small for it to have such a big effect.
Yeah, I agree. It seems small. My guess is that it's commitment issue stuff. Maybe not commitment issues in the sense of like you don't want to make a commitment, because I think moving in with somebody is a very big commitment. So maybe you're eager to jump into commitment, but don't know how to sustain it.
But you would think you would learn from your
Mm.
first experience.
Yeah,
Have you ever lived with a guy?
never. No, I'm fresh blood. I'll probably not move in with somebody until we're engaged or married.
Okay, interesting.
I have a hard time breaking up.
You know yourself, you're at risk for the testing the relationship issue.
Oh, yeah, I would totally fall into inertia. I'd be like, God, do I really want to break up with them? Like, now I have to move? Hell no. I'll make it work.
Oh, wow.
No, no, no.
Thank God you did not live
Yeah.
with your ex.
So it was kind of unfortunate that I was not able to find more psychology around what happens to you, what happens to your brain when you're living with somebody. There's honestly not a ton of research on this. And I don't know if it's just like a less interesting question. But what I did find was intentions when you move in is incredibly important and actually leads to happiness within the home, whether or not you're married. So if you are super clear with your partner on commitment intentions, this actually drastically increases the likelihood that you'll be happy living in the home with your partner and that you'll have a happy non-divorced marriage later on. Literally just having the conversation, are we going to get married? What do we want out of this living situation from each other? Timelines, especially, like you can't just say we're intending on getting married. That actually has zero effect on your happiness. Just saying that you intend to get married one day. Actually being engaged has a drastic increase in your happiness and positive outcomes. Part of the reason for this, aside from the obvious, right? Like you're on the same page, you have the commitment, whatever. That seems extremely obvious. The other side of this is weaponized incompetence and unequal division of household chores and childcare if you don't have commitment, and men just feel the inertia and feel like they don't have to do much in the relationship and just get all of the benefits, which I know you did look into household chore
Yeah.
stuff. So
What
I
a
wonder if this
perfect
is a nice transition. Yeah.
That's kind of wild. What a great transition
Yeah.
that is. Let's talk about household chores. I am so interested by this question. I gave my little anecdote at the beginning, but do you relate to that at all? Like, even though you haven't lived with these people, do you ever like start sharing responsibilities in any kind of way, or it's never gotten to that level?
I mean, I've like kind of, I guess, pseudo lived with part, because you know when you spend a lot of time together and you're like sleeping over at each other's place every night, so it's like basically like living together. I've done that. No, I don't think so. I mean, aside from like really small stuff, like who's making the coffee in the morning, that usually like
Yeah.
goes to one person. But no, nothing like this.
How do you think you would behave if you were to project yourself in the future? Do you think you would prefer a relationship where it had more clear division of labor when it came to household chores?
I think in my like fantasy world, it would be really nice not to have to do that. Like if we're all just pitching
Mhm.
in, and if you see something that needs to be done, you do it. But I feel like in reality, it doesn't work that way. And it's so much easier to like have division of labor. So you're not having fights about who's doing what. It's just really clear. You're taking that fight off the table.
Yeah. Even when I lived with roommates, like I lived with 3 guys when I was living in San Francisco, and I was like, God, I'm the only girl. There's 3 guys. The house is going to be a mess unless I like create a chore schedule. And so we literally rotated who took out the trash every week, as small as that is, because I knew if we didn't do that, I would be the one taking out the trash every week.
Smart.
Yeah, even that, I do think it's like you got to put some guardrails in. But I'm a firm believer in this specialization of tasks. You know, I learned in econ when I was in high school that that's what gives people the most utility. And I fully buy into that. There's just some chores I don't want to do. I don't want to take out the trash. It's stinky. And if it doesn't bother Avery to take out the trash, I would rather him do it. And I'll do a task that he doesn't like instead. And that is like the theory behind why people would specialize. In general, the theory is that the longer the expected duration of the relationship is, the greater the benefits of specialization, because you are getting those benefits over a longer period of time. So it makes more sense in the early days to specialize. And like, I mean, it's just economic theory, right? Like if you specialize, you'll become better at it. You'll become more efficient at it, like taking out the trash, all of that. I believe it.
I was
You're
just
laughing.
about to ask if that was, no, I was literally just about to ask, is this like a skill thing in the long term? Is that why they're saying this? Just like, yeah, I like really
I
slay
totally
taking out the
believe that.
garbage.
Okay, listen to me. Okay, so the garbage is like maybe a silly example, but there's other things in a relationship that you share, like who does the taxes every year, who does the finances, right? Or like investing, Those things, I do think there's actual learnings that you can get if you do the taxes every year.
I think I need to
Anyway.
get married so someone can do my taxes.
Yeah, I mean, the pro is like I no longer have to do things that I don't want to do. The con is I'm definitely far less independent than I was. And I used to really pride myself on independence. And I've lost that a ton. To me, it's like an interesting question between what is specialization and what is codependence. And codependence is like a negative word in our society. But I think there's like huge benefits to codependence in all of this that I've already been arguing for, right? And I think for me, I'm always wondering what is the line. I think at this point, I don't think I'm emotionally codependent on Avery. It's not like I can like not hang out with my friends if he's not here or anything like that. But I do think from like a organizing our lives perspective, it is just so intertwined at this point. We've totally specialized. And I would imagine that most married couples do that. That was my whole question for why I wanted to look at this. I wanted to know if I was normal or not, because sometimes if I think about it too much, I do get concerned, but just is what it is.
No. Okay, I can tell you as somebody who is in a relationship on the opposite end of that spectrum, like hyper independent, it ruins your relationship, literally, psychologically. I've talked about this endlessly in therapy. You need to have some sort of what they call interdependence. And like codependence is shifting over into something that can get toxic, right? But if you're hyper independent, you don't have a relationship. You need to be interdependent. Like you don't just rely on Avery, like Avery relies on you too. And that creates trust, intimacy, all the things. So no, it's a great thing. That's why I said, oh, when you said that, I was like, oh, cute. They're interdependent. Yeah. That's really sweet.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see what the research says. So I looked at this 2023 paper called Marriage versus Cohabitation, How Specialization and Time Use Differ by Relationship Type. Immediate takeaway, which I thought was really interesting, is women who marry without first cohabiting increase their reported housework time more compared to if you were cohabitated first by a pretty large magnitude, 3.7 hours versus 1.2 hours. So I was like, oh, interesting. However, that difference disappears when these cohabitating women do end up married. So it actually seems like it's a result of the marriage, not just whether you live together, but like the actual being married that influences how much household work you're doing as a woman.
Wow.
Obviously, we know gender roles exist, right? And so like women doing more of the household work, men traditionally doing outside jobs, employment, that kind of stuff. And so some of this, there's obviously also selection factors. Like if you're the type of woman who is going to get married right away before cohabiting, you might also be more traditional. You might be more willing to take on household tasks, household chores in accordance with your gender. You might also be younger because the average age of women who get married without any cohabitation is 2 to 3 years younger than women who get married having already cohabitated. So there are those factors. But what I thought was really interesting is if actually you look at within this giant bucket of household chores. So let's, again, step away from the gender roles on whether a woman is working outside of the home or not. Like I think we are all aware of the societal expectations there. But even within household work, this study looked at 6 specific tasks. So they looked at meal preparation, dishwashing, cleaning, food shopping, bill paying, and repair work. All of these, most couples have to do, maybe with the exception of repair work. If you don't have a house or something.
I was like, what the hell qualifies as repair work? And I'm thinking of like 1950s patching up a hole in the sock with a little ball and needle thread.
I don't think it's like darning and needlework. I think repair work is like fixing the lawnmower or whatever. Or like, you know.
Yeah. That just seems like such a quaint category. When's the last time anyone's repaired anything? The equivalent now is like, what, resetting the Wi-Fi router or something? Hilarious.
So I'm curious, before I get into the results, out of these 6 tasks, do you think these are inherently gendered? I'll repeat them.
Yeah.
Meal preparation, dishwashing, cleaning, food shopping, bill paying, and repair work. Which do you think are more masculine or feminine?
Well, clearly bill paying and repair work is for the men. And literally everything else sounds feminine, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I feel the same way. That's the assumption, at least. So the findings, both men and women on average report that married men specialize more than cohabiting men in repair work. Bill paying is not specialized at all. There is evidence of specialization in dishwashing. And it's funny because the article's like, even though dishwashing doesn't have any inherent skill, so it's surprising. And I'm like, no, obviously it's because it's gendered.
Yep.
But in general, men don't specialize at all. Women specialize far more, and they specialize far more when they're married than when they're just cohabiting. Another unexpected finding is that when one partner reports specializing more in one of these activities, they are also more likely to report specializing in all of the activities. So there's not really like a trade-off where like the man takes 3 things, the woman takes 3 things. It's that if you are specializing, you're actually specializing in all of at least these 6 tasks.
Okay, so the idea is that like the first mover specializer actually is the one who's specializing in everything?
So for these 6 tasks, if you're like, I do the meal preparation, you're also more likely to do the dishwashing, cleaning, food shopping, bill paying, and repair work than if you said, I don't specialize in any of those things.
Got it.
Couples report sharing responsibility for all these tasks only about 3% of the time. So I was surprised, but it sounds like most people are heavily specialized and they're not doing like what my friend who was over for dinner yesterday did, where they're just like, I'll do this 50% of the time, you'll do this 50% of the time. They are buying into the economic theory that like picking a task makes you more efficient at it.
I totally get why though, because think about how many fights you hear about of like couples therapy fighting about like who's doing what and like I don't feel cared for because these tasks aren't getting done. I pick up all the slack, blah, blah, blah. You can literally eliminate that with just being like, this is your thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. I get it.
Yeah. I found a lot of success in doing the division by like utility versus quantity or like hours spent. And I don't know if like other people would feel similarly, but I guess there are some things that just naturally take longer than other things, right? And I think what becomes difficult is when you start, I think Brene Brown has said stuff about this, which is when you expect a relationship to be exactly 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
If I put in 10 hours doing this, I'm expecting you to put in 10 hours doing that. I think from my perspective, it works much better if it's utility based. Like I really, for some reason, enjoy when you like finish the container of soap, you know, and like refilling soap. I like love that. So I'll do that all day. It's like pleasurable for me. It's technically a household task, but like I love it.
Okay.
So Avery will save, you know, if we run out of olive oil, because we have a giant tank of olive oil that we pour into a smaller tank that we like use to cook. If we run out of olive oil, he saves it for me so I could do it because I love it.
Hilarious. Who cooks more often?
He does all of the chopping and I do the cooking, like the actual applying heat.
Wow. You guys are hyper specialized.
We're super specialized. Yeah. I'm like very slow and not good at chopping. I've like lost my ability to chop things. I used to be better, but I just haven't chopped in so long. But I'm a better cook. I can like season better. Like I have a sense for things without needing to look at a recipe. I'm the head chef and he's the sous. That's what we call it.
That's so cute. God. It makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. For all our younger listeners, I'm giving you valuable life tips.
Hey, I'm not even younger and I need these tips. Experientially younger, I guess, by like a decade. Well, I'm glad that your cohabitation effect is non-present, Lucy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
And,
yes, I'm a
you
modern.
naturally are specializing.
I'm a modern woman.
A modern specialized woman.
Yeah, I'm like the peak of what all the research says. Is like we're moving towards a society more like me.
We love it. All right, guys. Thanks for listening in. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Our sources are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowabouttpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.